Welcome again to the British Library, Shashi.
Thank you, Namita.
You were here last year, and just the audiences, and the audiences got you. I remember Shashi sitting here on this stage, and it was overflowing beyond what Sanjoy described as the Indian adjustment because of Shashi doing a session on P.G. Wodehouse and why Indians love P.G. Wodehouse. And the esteemed biographer of P.G. Wodehouse looked amazed when and I was amazed when for about 10 minutes, he just quoted P.G. Wodehouse, story after story, every comma, every exclamation mark. And but we won't do that today.
Wouldn't fit with this title, unfortunately.
Wouldn't fit with this title. So I'm actually a bit anxious about interviewing Shashi because he is so articulate. He has this phenomenal fan following, was a social media pioneer and India's most followed politician until Mr. Narendra Modi overtook him in 2013. And I won't go on about his being a member of parliament and a member of this committee and a member of that committee, which the researchers have put in. But I first met you, I think, when you did your first novel, which was the Great Indian Novel. And his books have ranged in subject from the Mahabharata to riots to just about everything. We'll be talking in the context of Shashi's new book, Why I'm a Hindu. It's not a provocative book, but it's a very thought-provoking book. And I request you to read out some parts of it to give us a sense of your book.
Well, I thought, in fact, what might be best is just to start at the beginning.
Yes.
Because, Namita and I will be talking about it, and I think the intention is to invite the audience into the conversation later as well. But what I've tried to do in the book is really to first describe the Hinduism that I was born into, grew up with, learned about, read about, and cherish, followed by a description, which I won't be reading from now, but we can talk about, of the Hindutva ideology, in the words of its own proponents, which has since, as you know, come to dominate public perceptions of Hinduism in a very wrong and distorted way. Followed by a section called Taking Back Hinduism, which is really about the need to reclaim Hinduism for its, for what I would think of as the kind of vision of the faith that I describe in the first 130 pages. So I'll give you sort of 6 or 7 minutes from the beginning, just to give you a flavor, both of how I approach the subject and the tone, as it were, that I use in my writing. Why am I a Hindu? The obvious answer to this question is, of course, it's because I was born one. Most people have little choice about the faith they grew up with. It was selected for them at birth by the accident of geography and their parents' cultural moorings. The overwhelming majority of Hindus in the world were born Hindu. A small handful, inspired by marriage, migration, or philosophical conviction, have adopted the faith, usually by a process of conversion unknown to most Hindus. Unlike that small minority, I was never anything else. I was born a Hindu, grew up as one, and have considered myself one all my life. But what does being a Hindu mean? Many of us began having to interrogate ourselves in the late 1980s, when the world media first began to speak and write of Hindu fundamentalism. This was odd because we knew of Hinduism as a religion without fundamentals. No founder or prophet, no organized church, no compulsory beliefs or rites of worship, no uniform conception of the good life, no single sacred book. My Hinduism was a lived faith. It was a Hinduism of experience and upbringing, a Hinduism of observation and conversation, not one anchored in deep religious study, though of course the two are not mutually exclusive. I knew few mantras, just a few snatches of a couple of hymns, and practically no Sanskrit. My knowledge of Hindu sacred texts and philosophies came entirely from reading them in English translation. When I went to a temple, I prayed in an odd combination of English, Sanskrit, and my mother tongue Malayalam, instinctively convinced that an omniscient God would naturally be multilingual. Skipping a paragraph or two. The first challenge, of course, was definitional. The name Hindu itself denotes something less and more than a set of theological beliefs. In many languages, French and Persian amongst them, the word for Indian is Hindu. Originally, Hindu simply meant the people beyond the river Sindhu or Indus. But the Indus is now in Islamic Pakistan. And to make matters worse, the word Hindu did not exist in any Indian language till its use by foreigners gave Indians a term for self-definition. Hindus, in other words, called themselves by a label that they didn't invent themselves in any of their own languages, but adopted cheerfully when others began to refer to them by that word. Of course, many prefer a different term altogether, Sanatan Dharma or eternal faith, which I discuss later. I'm not reading that bit now. Hinduism is thus the name that foreigners first applied to what they saw as the indigenous religion of India. It embraces an eclectic range of doctrines and practices, from pantheism to agnosticism, and from faith in reincarnation to belief in the caste system. But none of these constitutes an obligatory credo for a Hindu. There are none. We have no compulsory dogmas. This is, of course, rather unusual. A Catholic is a Catholic because he believes Jesus was the Son of God who sacrificed himself for man. A Catholic believes in the Immaculate Conception and the Virgin Birth, offers confession, genuflects in church, and is guided by the Pope and a celibate priesthood. A Muslim must believe that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his prophet. A Jew cherishes his Torah or Pentateuch and his Talmud. A Parsi worships at a fire temple. A Sikh honors the teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib above all else. There is no Hindu equivalent to any of these beliefs. There are simply no binding requirements to being a Hindu, not even a belief in God. I grew up in a Hindu household. Our home always had a prayer room where paintings and portraits of assorted divinities jostled for shelf and wall space with fading photographs of departed ancestors, all stained by ash scattered from the incense burned daily by my devout parents. I've written before of how my earliest experiences of piety came from watching my father at prayer. Every morning after his bath, my father would stand in front of the prayer room, wrapped in his towel, his wet hair still uncombed, and chant his Sanskrit mantras. But he never obliged me to join him. He exemplified the Hindu idea that religion is an intensely personal matter, that prayer is between you and whatever image of your maker you choose to worship. In the Hindu way, I was to find my own truth. I think I have. I am a believer, despite a brief period of schoolboy atheism, of the kind that comes with the discovery of rationality and goes with an acknowledgement of its limitations. And I'm happy to describe myself as a believing Hindu, not just because it's the faith into which I was born, but for a string of other reasons, though faith requires no reason. I first go into the so-called cultural reasons, and then the second. But another reason for my belief in Hinduism is, for lack of a better phrase, its intellectual fit. I'm more comfortable with the tenets of Hinduism than I would be with those of the other faiths of which I know. I've long thought of myself as liberal, not merely in the political sense of the term, or even in relation to principles of economics, but as an attitude to life. To accept people as one finds them, to allow them to be and become what they choose, and to encourage them to do whatever they like, so long as it does not harm others, is my natural instinct. Rigid and censorious beliefs have never appealed to my temperament. In matters of religion, too, I found my liberal instincts reinforced by the faith in which I was brought up. Hinduism is, in many ways, predicated on the idea that the eternal wisdom of the ages and of divinity cannot be confined to a single sacred book. We have many, and we can delve into each to find our own truth or truths. As a Hindu, I can claim adherence to a religion without an established church or priestly papacy, a religion as rituals and customs I am free to reject, a religion that does not oblige me to demonstrate my faith by any visible sign, by subsuming my identity in any collectivity, not even by a specific day or time or frequency of worship. There is no Hindu Pope, no Hindu Vatican, no Hindu catechism, not even a Hindu Sunday. As a Hindu, I follow a faith that offers a veritable smorgasbord of options to the worshipper, of divinities to adore and to pray to, of rituals to observe or not, of customs and practices to honor or not, of fasts to keep or not. As a Hindu, I subscribe to a creed that is free of the restrictive dogmas of Holy Writ, one that refuses to be shackled to the limitations of a single volume of holy revelation. At the same time, as a Hindu, I appreciate the fact that Hinduism professes no false certitudes. Its capacity to express wonder at creation and simultaneously skepticism about the omniscience of the Creator are unique to Hinduism. Both are captured beautifully in a verse from the 3,500-year-old Rig Veda, the Nasadiya Sukta, or creation hymn, and I quote the hymn at length, but I'll just read the last few lines, the last 4 lines. Who knows whence this creation had its origin? He, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not, he who surveys it all from the highest heaven, he knows. Oh, maybe even he does not know. Maybe even he does not know. I love a faith that raises such a fundamental question about no less a supreme being than the creator of the universe. Maybe he does not know indeed. Who are we mere mortals to claim a knowledge of which even he cannot be certain? And while I am paradoxically listing my reasons for a faith beyond reason, let me cite the fundamental point. Above all, as a Hindu, I belong to the only major religion in the world that does not claim to be the only true religion. I find it immensely congenial to be able to face my fellow human beings of other faiths without being burdened by the conviction that I am embarked upon a true path that they have somehow missed. This dogma lies at the core of the Semitic faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The Bible contains the words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. John 14:6. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, declares the Quran, denying unbelievers all possibility of redemption, let alone of salvation or paradise. Hinduism asserts that all ways of belief are equally valid, and Hindus readily venerate the saints and the sacred objects of other faiths. I'm proud that I can honor the sanctity of other faiths without feeling that I am betraying my own.
So, Shashi, I had come prepared with a set of questions, but when you said, even he does not know of the Creator, and you
That's a translation.
Yes, I remembered, and I wanted to remind the audience and you, that Hinduism is perhaps the only religion in the world where the goddesses, not as consorts of the gods, but the goddesses are as strong and important as the gods.
Right. Hindu philosophy actually doesn't gender God. That's why the translation is probably a reflection more of the limitations of the English language. Because in the early Hindu philosophy, for over about 1,000 years, the Hindu idea of God is actually very similar to the Muslim. That is, that God has no shape, no form, no gender. We don't know whether God is an idea, a word, a breath, a spark. And so the concept was called the Nirguna Brahman. Brahman was the spirit, the divine spirit that suffuses the entire cosmos. And therefore, because it was a God without qualities, the Nirguna Brahman, essentially the idea was all that suffused the faith. Then the great philosophers realized this wasn't good enough for ordinary people, because ordinary people wanted to see, visualize, imagine something they could worship. And in the Vedic years, there was an awful lot of nature worship as a result. People worshiped trees and rivers and mountains and so on because they needed to see and think of something and attribute divinity to it. And so emerged the concept of the Saguna Brahman, where words like Bhagwan and Ishwar come for the first time. But these great philosophers said, well, since no one really knows what God looks like, and no one has actually ever seen God in that form, and God can be anything and everything and everywhere, you're free to imagine God as you wish. So if you want to imagine God as a pot-bellied man with an elephant head, Ganesh, you are free to do so. But if you want to imagine God as an 8-armed woman riding a tiger, Durga, you're free to do that too. Because, as I said, there is no knowledge of what gender God is, he, she, it, whatever, and various other forms. And so there are 333 million names of God and manifestations of God. And by that same logic, if you want to imagine God as a bleeding man suffering on a cross, that is fine too for a Hindu. So that ultimately is the answer. That he perhaps is a misnomer, but you know.
No, I was just
you're right.
appreciating this because God Shiva is Ardhanareshwar, half man and half woman.
Half woman, in some manifestations.
In some manifestations. So with this long introduction, would you say Hinduism as it is understood today or practiced today, would you call it a religion, a cultural construct, a political construct? What is your understanding of Hinduism as it stands today, not 3,500 years ago or even...
The problem is it's so difficult to separate all of these. Hinduism as religion, Hinduism as culture and social practice, and now Hinduism as politics, which can be separated. I'll come to that separately. But Hinduism as religion, Hinduism as culture becomes a real challenge because the religious ideas, I mean, as you know, the cliche is Hinduism's not a religion, it's a way of life, but religion to me is not just the Western term that some dismiss it as being, because when we speak of Hinduism as a religion, we mean those aspects of the faith and its philosophies that treat with issues of creation and human existence, of the purpose of life on this earth, about reaching out to the divine, all of those spiritual quests that people can find other words for, that's religion, and that's Hinduism as an awful lot of this in its makeup. But there is also Hinduism as cultural practice, as Hinduism as society, and I mean, after all, if as an admiral's wife you go to a Ganesh temple and smash a coconut before praying to Ganesh, you're performing a religious act, but the same admiral's wife smashes the same coconut against the hull of a ship to launch it, because we don't do champagne in launching ships, right? So is that a religious act or is it a cultural one? It's very difficult really to spread these things, to separate these things. I would argue that Hinduism is and can be all of the above, except that in this book, and in particular the first part, I try and draw a distinction between those things which are intrinsic to religion, as I said, which deal with these ideas of the larger purpose of life on this planet, and those things which, to my view, are not intrinsic to the religion, but have evolved a social practice, like caste.
So in your book, I found this quote from Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, our first president, which said, he asked, is it a museum of beliefs, a medley of rites, or a mere map, a geographical expression? I'm coming to that museum of beliefs because one of the criticisms, and a very valid criticism, is that it is not a just religion in many ways. My very dear friend, the Dalit leader, Kancha Elaya's book, Why I Am Not a Hindu, speaks of the inequality within Hinduism and how the religion paradoxically disadvantages its own flock, its own people, a lesser people there. He speaks of, I quote, the inequality by birth of different communities within Hinduism as enshrined in the caste system that pervades Hindu scripture, morality, ritual, social organization, really the entire Hindu worldview. The very theory of caste goes against the fundamental principle that all humans are created equal. So what do you have to say about Kancha Elaya's view of why he is not a Hindu?
Well, I haven't read the book, but I'm familiar with the view, and in fact, it is a sort of key criticism of Hinduism, which to my view is really of Hindu practice as social practice and custom rather than as religion, because as I would argue, if you look at this question of caste, which is in many ways abominable, particularly when it involves discriminating against fellow human beings, you find plenty of evidence in the ancient texts that found caste reprehensible. I can give you two right now, stories that illustrate the point. But before that, let me just point out that the two great epics of Hinduism, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The Ramayana is written by Valmiki, the son of a low-caste hunter, and the Mahabharata is dictated by Ved Vyas, the son of a low-caste fisherwoman. And these are people who are revered by Brahmin sages. So what price caste in this particular context? But the examples I would give you, one is, there's a famous fable of Lord Krishna and his childhood friend Uttanga, and how Uttanga asked Lord Krishna for a boon and says, excuse me, I'm battling a bit of a cough. And he says, you know, whenever I'm thirsty, I want you to promise me you will provide me water. And Lord Krishna gives him the boon. Years later, Uttanga is wandering in a forest, gets lost. He's searching for his path, begins to feel thirsty. And when he reaches a point of desperate thirst, he invokes the boon. But no spring suddenly gushes out of the earth. He doesn't stumble across a rivulet. He's still walking on, still feeling desperately thirsty. A hunter emerges from the thicket, and this hunter is low caste. He's wearing animal skins and rags, but he extends to him a little animal skin pouch and says, "You seem thirsty, drink." But the haughty Uttanga says, no, I'm a Brahmin, I'm not going to drink this sort of stuff, and not from you, not from an animal skin pouch. And after the hunter insists a couple of times, he goes away, and Uttanga stumbles on cursing Lord Krishna for not having kept his word. And of course, then Lord Krishna materializes. And he says, "I sent you, Lord Indra, king of the Devas, in the guise of a hunter. And he offered you not just water, but Amrit, the nectar of immortality. But by looking only at his caste and by basing yourself on such externalities, you've denied yourself not only an opportunity to quench your thirst, but to assure yourself immortality." And then Lord Krishna disappears. There are stories like this throughout the early scriptures. And then in actual historical recorded fact, Adi Shankara, the great sage who is credited with reviving a moribund Hinduism, literally around the 10th century, who marched from my state of Kerala all the way up to Kashmir in the north, to Assam and Odisha in the east, to Gujarat in the west, established monasteries, debated scholars, particularly the Buddhists, because this was really an attempt to revive Hinduism in the face of the growing popularity of Buddhism.
Of the casteless popularity.
So what happens is he's marching, he's walking in Varanasi with his followers, and coming the other way on the same narrow path is an outcast, a Chandala. They didn't use the word Dalit in those days. And the followers of the great sage rather brusquely order the outcast out of the sage's way, ask him to clear off from the road. But the man stands his ground. And the Chandala says directly to Adi Shankara, "Why should I make way for you? Is not the Atman within me the same as the Atman within you?" And Adi Shankara is so struck by this superb distillation of the essence of Hindu wisdom that he prostrates himself before the outcast and says, "You are my guru." Now, these kinds of stories, and of course Gandhiji also based himself on this principle of Adi Shankara's, basically says, if you believe in the Hindu concept of Atman, that all of us, Atman is the soul, each of us has, in Western religions, the body has a soul. In Hinduism, the soul has a body. So the soul, the Atman, which is shared amongst all of us and every other living creature, from ants to cows in Gorakhpur, this Atman is in temporary possession of our body. And when it's found in purpose, useful purpose served, it will discard this body and move on. But it is the same Atman. And ultimately, this Atman, this common soul, is there throughout the universe. And eventually, its yearning is to merge into the Brahman, into the cosmic spirit. This is the, if you like, the philosophical idea. If you believe this, in other words, if you are a Hindu, then surely you have to accept that that guarantees the equality of every individual, and that the external appearance, the external circumstances or station in life cannot be a valid basis for discrimination. So my answer is that yes, we should criticize casteism where it's applied in social practice. We should fight against it. We should work for reform. But Hinduism is capable of reform, of transformation, of regeneration. It took centuries before Dalits were allowed into temples, for example. Temple entry, proclamation in some princely states was in the 20th century. So, but the change came. And now it's no longer, just a month before I was finishing the manuscript of this book, I read the amazing news that in Kerala, they had just ordained 36 non-Brahmin priests, including 6 Dalits. And these people were now going to be going and, of course, serving in these temples, which means, since in every temple, irrespective of caste, you can't enter the sanctum sanctorum, only the priest who conducts the ritual and performs the abhishekam and so on can. Here you will have Dalits whose ancestors may not have been allowed into the temple, now actually conducting the rituals in the sanctum sanctorum. So change is necessary, must be fought for, and is welcome and can happen. As I argue, it's not intrinsic to Hinduism as a religion.
I'm going to quote you again, but before that I say that if that is the case from the Puranas and the epics to Gandhi and all this, why have Dalits historically and in the present day, why do they seek redemption in Buddhism, in Islam, in any way out of the horrific conditions. We should not be amazed that 6 Dalits have been ordained. It should be a matter of course because it is constitutionally so. We have the most wonderful literature in our country is happening, a lot of it from Dalit writing of protest, transformative writing. You yourself have said that my original response was to be oblivious to caste and indifferent to the caste associations of friends, employees, associates. It's no longer enough in today's politically caste-conscious India. You've talked about caste blindness, which is an affectation available only to the privileged. And the disadvantaged caste cannot afford to be indifferent to the realities of their life and situation. As a politician, I cannot believe that you have only seen these exalted examples of Hindu large-heartedness.
No.
But there is a problem there. And how do you think of addressing it?
There is a problem, and it must be dealt with as a social problem, and it must be dealt with socially and politically.
So you say that the religion is not at fault.
Forgive me. No, my answer is that really, what I object to is when people who behave in this abominable, obnoxious way seek spiritual sanction and say, oh, this is the laws of Manu, or this particular text or that particular text. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, they should have no relevance today. Because if you wish, Hinduism, JLF would love this metaphor. Hinduism is like this vast library in which no book ever goes out of print. So you've got all of these volumes out there.
That's a good one.
And you can actually pick and choose from them, and you can find the annotations of previous generations and add your own annotations to the margins of these books, but they're still all available to pick from. If you choose the things that serve your most obnoxious behaviors, don't blame the religion, blame your choice. Because you could as easily have chosen the kinds of things I have cited which argue against caste. That's on the religious side. And I'm not denying, I mean, you talked about this. I have a little section in the book where I talk about my caste blindness. I didn't reinvent the wheel on caste because I've written about it in so many of my other books. But I had an experience where, the child of a sort of father of the nationalist generation, came of age at the time of independence, dropped his caste name in college. When my sisters and I, our friends came home to play, there was never any allusion to either the caste or the religion of our friends. We were never made conscious of these things. We just had to acquire the knowledge with time, but it was never a factor in our homes and our upbringing. And certainly, for me, it never mattered to me what anyone's caste was, and I thought that was the right way to be. I mean, I had read Nehru thinking that caste would disappear from India's public consciousness. Of course, he was wrong, because caste in Indian democracy became an instrument for political mobilization, and people therefore became more conscious of caste rather than less. But when I talked about this once in a column, I got a sharp rebuke from a young Dalit blogger who turned out to be 18 years old, so it was quite instructive. And she said, you say that, you don't care about the caste, and I don't care about the caste of my cook. As long as he can cook. If he's a Dalit, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. I'll happily eat his food. And if he can't cook, the fact that he's a Brahmin wouldn't help me, So it's the content of performance and character and belief that matters. But this girl wrote saying, well, this is an affectation of privilege, because you can afford to be oblivious to caste. Is there a Dalit who can say he's oblivious to his caste? And that ultimately is the rebuke that I think stands, because ultimately those who have suffered the whiplash of discrimination on the basis of the accident of their birth have every right to be angry, and those of us who have not suffered that have every obligation to help them overcome the grounds of that anger. That includes the option, if they so wish, to choose another faith, as some have done, but not a majority, and the others to be allowed and helped to lead decent lives. After all, why does the Constitution of India contain this huge affirmative, the world's oldest and farthest affirmative action program, which includes reservations of 85 seats in Parliament for seats in government employment and medical colleges and universities and so on, for the so-called scheduled castes and tribes. It is a way of expiating for 3,000 years of injustice. You can say it's late in the day, but it's happening, and that's why I believe it's the right thing to do.
I do agree that the Constitution is a monumental work in India, and it affirms a lot of ideals. But within Hinduism, if there was to be reform, how could it be provoked or inspired?
Well, within Hinduism, there are already movements for reform. I don't know how many of you read an article just about a month or so ago about a priest who carried a Dalit into the temple on his own shoulders to sort of symbolically reverse, as it were, the inequality that's implicit in the caste. And there are many, many such movements, and there are also places where we hear of people being discriminated against, attacked, and so on. And by the way, it's not only Hinduism, sadly.
Yes.
Just 2 weeks ago in Kerala, a Dalit Christian, there is a Dalit who had chosen the option of, whose family had chosen the option of conversion. His parents were Christian, his grandparents are Christians. They've been Christian for 3 generations, but they are known to be of Dalit origin. This boy eloped with a quote-unquote higher caste Christian girl, and her parents and brother kidnapped him and apparently are responsible for his death. Now, there's an incident which has nothing to do with Hinduism, but has a lot to do with Indian society. So everything in society, as far as I'm concerned, is up for grabs, can be contested, can be fought, and can and should be reformed. But why blame Hinduism for it? In this particular instance, neither victim nor perpetrator was Hindu. It's a social problem, in other words.
So let's move on to the 330 million gods that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Most Hindus, including myself, have one Ishta Devta or one particular god, or 2 or 3 for different situations.
And for different days and different needs, exactly.
So, 2 questions. Who is your personal god? Is it Shiva? Is it Vishnu as Krishna, who represents stability? Is it Ram, sacred embodiment of kingship, who is constantly invoked in politics and religion? Or is it Hanuman, symbol of loyalty and faith, which are the virtues of the dynastic Congress party?
Well, the easy answer is all of the above, and more.
But who is your particular
My Ishtadevta is actually Ganesh.
Ganesh.
I rather like a god that sort of so visibly embodies imperfection, that sort of shows us up for all the inadequacies we are. And at the same time, it's credited with an ability to remove obstacles. Because God knows one spends one's life with lots of obstacles being thrown in one's path.
Indeed.
And one could use some extra terrestrial help to clear the path. And so the remover of obstacles, Ganesh is my Ishtadevta. But in fact, in the prayer alcove I have it at home, I actually have several gods, including Shiv, including Ram, including Krishna, including Hanuman, and for that matter, while we're about it, a lovely little statue of the Buddha given to me by a very devout Buddhist, with apparently a prayer scroll personally blessed by the Dalai Lama inside the statue. And I'm very happy to pray to all of them. Mind you, the Hindu answer is that Buddha in any case is an incarnation of Vishnu. I think number 8 in the sequence, so that's all right. But even then, I mean, to me, since I know from my reading of the text that you're not supposed to literally believe that God looks like any of these images, you're supposed to see them as reflections of your need for an imaginative crutch in order to be able to concentrate your worship. And therefore, what this is all about is very simply seeking in God certain qualities that you wish to see strengthened in yourself. So that, why does a student pray to Saraswati before passing an examination? Or a businessman go to Lord Balaji to be blessed with wealth, or for that matter to Lakshmi? Or those who go to either Shiv or Kali to have their enemies destroyed, and so on. These are very concrete, practical purposes. But praying to this abstract, formless God is not going to be particularly useful or easy. So therefore, you imagine and visualize God as a sort of embodiment of a certain quality, a certain divine quality that will help you get through your very temporal challenge. And that's what people essentially find themselves doing when they pray. Hinduism, remember, says there are 4 ways of stretching your hands out to divinity. Bhakti or worship is only one of them. And in many ways, it's arguably not the most important. It's the easiest. It's what most people do. And in fact, many Hindus don't realize we didn't actually have temples until the Greeks taught us. When Alexander the Great and his crowd showed up in the 4th century, it was their stories of temples as places to worship that taught us. We didn't have temples before that. But what's interesting, of course, is the entire, the agamas of later, all the very complicated rules about how temples should be organized, where the sanctum should be, the positioning, geography, all of the stuff is very, very important. But I'm just saying that the forms of worship themselves have evolved, and bhakti is in many ways the easiest for most ordinary people, but not the only one. There is jnana yoga, for example, which is studying texts, reading, acquiring knowledge, and through that very complicated knowledge coming to a grasp of metaphysics and of theology. There is, of course, karma yoga, which is rather underappreciated. That is the yoga of service, of going out there and performing good deeds that help people. That's a way of reaching out to God. So whether you're a sannyasi going out and teaching and preaching, or whether you are, dare I say it, a public servant trying to do good for the... She didn't even laugh. These are all forms of karma, of action. And then there is Raja Yoga, which is entirely interior, where you are, through meditation, inner reflection, trying to find God. I often joke that while other practitioners of other religions look to the heavens to find God, the Hindu looks within himself. Because, of course, that is a very important way of, through that interiority of being able to achieve the ultimate ambition of merging your consciousness with the absolute. So all of these are different ways, and going to temples or imagining a particular idol and worshipping that is only one form. It's a great form, it's a useful form, it's what most people find easiest to do, but there's a whole lot more to Hinduism than bhakti.
Shashi, you've been through great personal tragedy and hurt in the last few years. I'm sure Hinduism has been, if not a crutch, but at least a great solace and a help. How would you say Hinduism, if this is not too personal a question, how have you learned to reappreciate Hinduism through these experiences?
There's so much one can delve into, which indeed, I mean, I take a less painful example because it's long since ceased to bother me. When I sort of contested for the position of Secretary General of the United Nations, which I thought I'd sort of spent the rest of my life preparing for, and lost. I found myself turning to the Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita's simplest idea that a lot of things are worth doing, whether or not they culminate in the reward that perhaps you hoped to get in the purpose of doing it, that was actually extremely consolatory. That is that you should be doing what is the right thing to do, irrespective of the prospect of reward. So take up a cause, whatever that cause may be, do your best to pursue it, and if it doesn't work out in the end, it doesn't matter, the cause is worth doing. The Hindu idea that very often the journey is as important as the destination. And indeed, if the journey prematurely terminates somewhere else, maybe that was the intended destination. And you should just accept it for what it's worth. It's actually been a good prescription for life generally, that you appreciate each moment of living, not just because you don't know when that might end, but also because this in and of itself has a value. Then when it comes to the more difficult circumstances of the last few years, a certain... I don't like the word fatalism. As you know, I've discussed Hindu fatalism in the book, and I don't particularly think it's the right thing, but a certain capacity for acceptance, I think, has been helpful, and a certain faith that at the end, what will be, right? I'm not going to sing Ke Sara Sara to you, but the thinking that
So let it be.
You have to do, you live according to your dharma, you perform according to your conscience, your good conduct. As long as your conscience is clear, as long as you're doing the right thing, have faith that eventually both your intent and your conduct will be vindicated. And if not, as long as you've done nothing wrong, what more can you do about it? I mean, if that sounds embarrassingly fatalistic, the fact is that to that degree, I suppose, I'm Hindu enough to accept there may be some things, including injustice, which are beyond the individual's control.
So to move away from Hinduism a little bit, you've written about the Taj Mahal in your book, and I quote again, The Taj Mahal is merely the latest victim of a political campaign over Indian history that seeks to reinvent the idea of India itself. So can you elaborate? Because many around the world think of Taj Mahal as the essential emblem of India.
Right.
Why is it getting a makeover?
This was a bizarre little episode that happened last year, in fact, when the biggest state in India, Uttar Pradesh, 210 million people, 80 seats in parliament, it really counts for a lot in our political consciousnesses. Bizarrely, I suppose, headed by a saffron-robed monk, a mahant, Yogi Adityanath, who, and that's not the name he was born with, that's the name he has had bestowed upon him by his religious center. He has now become the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh. And at one point, he startled the press by announcing that he was going to stop the practice of governors and chief ministers of Uttar Pradesh for the previous several decades of giving distinguished guests a little replica in marble of the Taj Mahal, because that was supposed to be the proudest monument. He said, this is not a Hindu culture. This is not worthy of the state. And he said, I'm going to stop giving these and I'm going to give people a copy of the Bhagavad Gita instead. Now, if this wasn't startling enough, a day later, the Uttar Pradesh Tourism Department issues a booklet of all the major tourist attractions in their state. And guess what? The Taj Mahal isn't in it. You know, the burning ghats of Benares, I think, are on the cover. Now, this is obviously fatuous and stupid, and it's not perhaps worth belaboring, but it actually points to a sort of culture war that some people in our political space have embarked upon. And that culture war is a war which basically says that anything that has come to India as a result of previous centuries of influence from non-Hindu sources, particularly Muslims and Muslim rule, should somehow be rejected. Now, even funnier than this is there's another faction of the Hindutva movement that argues that the Taj Mahal was actually a Hindu temple called Tejo Mahal, and that therefore they should recapture it and have bhajans going on there instead. But we'll leave them aside because even Yogi Adityanath clearly doesn't agree with them, considers them a fringe group. Instead, he's got this approach. And of course, naturally he was shamed, and I believe he was rapped on the knuckles by the central government, and after a while there's less talk of that. But because it's emblematic of this larger attitude, I thought it was worth mentioning in a book in which I discuss some of the other attempts by the Hindutva movement to really go to war with Indian history, with India's culture, with the idea of India that we've talked about, that is a pluralist idea that embraces people of all faiths. And that, to my mind, is fundamentally un-Hindu. The entire approach of taking the soaring majesty of the Upanishads and the Vedas and reducing it to something like the team identity of the British football hooligan, which is what they've tried to do with Hinduism, you know, saying essentially that Hinduism is sort of like my team is better than any other team, and if you don't support my team and you dare to show it otherwise, I will hit you on the head. I mean, that is not Hinduism, but that's what these chaps have tried to do to it.
So my thought, listening to you, is this. Hinduism is the majoritarian religion, the very differently defined religion in 1 billion plus people. Why are Hindus, and I'm taking it at face value, I'm looking at every aspect of Hinduism with equal affection, including the goons and that's how religions change, evolve, societies change. But why is there this insecurity? Why do a large number of Hindu practitioners constantly feel insecure? What are the social factors that have led to this feeling, instead of feeling proud of being in the longest, continuous, most eclectic, most wonderful religion possible, as you yourself have quoted it to be? Why there's always this feeling that somebody is sneering at them, somebody is laughing at them, and what are the roots of that?
Before I answer that, I think I need to take one step back, because in our conversation we haven't covered the question of some of the core tenets of Hinduism that I hinted at in the reading I did. And one of them is important and worth citing before I answer your question, because I've been for a very long time a huge fan of Swami Vivekananda, who was the preacher in the late 19th century who did most to put Hinduism on the global consciousness again. And in his speech in Chicago at the World Parliament of Religions in 1893, he said something very important. He quoted the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, one of the early hymns that he knew, and he said, it says that just as various rivers flow in different ways in different directions, some crooked, some straight, all ending up at the same sea, so also all ways of worship and prayer, all religions, ultimately end up at the same divine source. And then he, in talking about this, he said one sentence that has really stuck in my mind since my teenage years, and that is, he said, "I'm proud to speak for a faith which has taught the world not just tolerance, but acceptance." Now, I thought about that and I'm still thinking about it. It's a profoundly important idea, because I went to a school where my textbooks taught me that tolerance was a virtue, right? We all taught the tolerant king is a good king because he indulges. But in fact, when you really think about tolerance, it's a profoundly patronizing idea, isn't it? Because what does tolerance say? Tolerance says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in the right to be wrong. That is tolerance. Whereas acceptance, which is what Vivekananda says Hinduism is all about, says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And to my mind, this is so much the core of Hinduism. This is why Hinduism doesn't insist on one holy book or one god or one manifestation of God. It doesn't have a Sunday. All 7 days of the week are holy, depending on who you want to consecrate your prayers to, right? So you can go off on Monday and fast for Shiva or pray for Shiva, and Wednesday you can go off and propitiate Ganesh. Yes, it's entirely up to you. I mean, this extraordinary eclecticism is part of the acknowledgement that all ways of worship are equally valid. Now, this Hindu idea should therefore make opposition to, revulsion of, attacks upon people of other faiths impossible. In fact, Vivekananda very confidently said, the Hindu will throw himself upon the funeral pyre, but he will not light the flames of Inquisition.
Yes.
Boy, was he wrong in terms of the very people who are now hailing him as a hero without ever having read a word he wrote, maybe because he wrote it and spoke it mainly in English. Here they are busy lighting the flames of Inquisition. Busy torturing people, indeed assaulting human beings in the name of cow protection, and causing great damage and
why is that insecurity?
So why they do that? Now that I've explained why what they're doing is not Hindu and is indeed profoundly un-Hindu, I think it's born out of a pathetic inferiority complex.
Yes, but where does that
Hindutva, a political doctrine, not a religious one, is an ideology born of a consciousness of humiliation, of subjugation, of being conquered, of having been reduced in your imagination for over 1,000 years to a lower status than people of other faiths who ruled over you. And this chip on the shoulder is what they're acting out. There is this view that now we finally got rid of those guys, we're in charge, we now need to do to them what they've done to us. Sort of golden rule reversed, right? I mean, do unto them what they have done unto you, except they haven't. I mean, the people who are around, who are in India today of other faiths, are not all sort of descended from,
conquerors,
the boots of the conquerors or whatever. It's silly. It's an unhistorical and rather ignorant idea. It's also held particularly in the northern states of India, because, for example, in my state of Kerala, there was no Islamic conquest. Islam came peacefully through traders and travelers in the lifetime of the Prophet. And the message came in a very peaceful way. And it was not associated with anything like what these chaps think of, because they were worrying about the kings, thank you so much, kings in the, in the north who may have indeed attacked and demolished Hindu temples and so on. But you don't waste your energy revenging yourself upon history. History is its own revenge. Time passes on. People change. What's up once can be down later, and vice versa. And the categories of reference will change and have changed in many, many ways. But this small political fringe doesn't think so. And their ideological impetus comes from the writings, in particular of a man called V.D. Savarkar in the 1920s and 30s, who came up with the term Hindutva and wrote about this ideology, and who himself was not very religious. He openly admitted that, as far as he was concerned, he didn't think of himself as particularly Hindu, that he wasn't, in terms of religious belief, that he wasn't very fond of going to temples, etc. But he was writing in language very reminiscent of what people were writing in Italy for Mussolini, in Spain to support Franco, and of course in Germany in defense of the Nazi cause and Hitler. They were writing about race pride. And it's very striking that Savarkar uses the word race quite a lot in talking about the Hindus. The Hindu race must assert itself. So it's very much a phenomenon of the 20s and 30s, discredited everywhere else in the world, which suddenly, owing to the peculiar circumstances of Indian politics, has been given a new impetus by the success of a political movement professing this ideology.
So my last question for today, before we open it to the audience. Again, I'm quoting from your delightful book, where you've said, you've mentioned how Mahatma Gandhi was a great exemplar of plural Hinduism.
I think so, yeah.
And in a response to being classified a Hindu, he said, I am a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, a Parsi, a Jew. It is equally valid to recall Muhammad Ali Jinnah's response. He said, only a Hindu could say that. So your book is a testimony to the pluralism of the faith, and do you think that, that this absurd belief that we are everywhere in the Hindu faith will reassert itself against the present moments of insecurity that it is going through?
Yeah, I think we really need to stand up for a different version of Hinduism, a more self-confident, more inclusive, more all-embracing Hinduism that says that we are not threatened by the worship of others. In fact, one of the arguments that's constantly flung back at me by the Hindutva Brigade when I write these things is, okay, so you want to say, I mean, Vivekananda's famous thing, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, which is there is only one truth, but different sages call it by different names. The famous idea that that all religions can coexist and be the same because you should treat them all as equal, etc. And they say, oh, it's very easy for you as a Hindu to say that. Will the Muslims say it? Can you teach the Muslims to do this? To which my answer is, it is not the job of the Hindus to teach the Muslims to be good Hindus. Let the Muslims be good Muslims according to the lights of their own faith. Let the Christians be good Christians. Ultimately, people have to follow their own faith and their own cherished beliefs in their own ways, as long as there is mutual respect and no assault on each other. The problem, unfortunately, is that the Hindutva movement seeks very actively, because of this inferiority complex, to discriminate against others. I mean, one of the big issues for me politically right now is the very genuine threat to the fundamental underpinnings of our Constitution. We have the Prime Minister on the one hand saying that the Constitution is his holy book, and on the other hand extolling the works of Deen Dayal Upadhyay and requiring every ministry in the government of India to do seminars on the thought of Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Now, the two ideas are simply not compatible, because Deen Dayal Upadhyay rejected the Constitution of India and said it should be torn up. And Deen Dayal Upadhyay, M.S. Golwalkar, who for 33 years was head of the RSS from 1940 to 73, and Savarkar, they all objected to the Constitution. And they had two basic objections. The first was, of course, something you can't do very much about, which is actually not that wrong. He said, this is not an Indian constitution. It is full of imported Western ideals, written by Anglophile lawyers in the wrong language. Now, what can you do about that? That's true. Okay, but it's what we've got. It's a rather good constitution, so we'll take it. But then the second objection is more far-reaching and more worrying. The second objection, the reason they say this constitution should be discarded, is they say it rests on a fundamentally flawed premise as to what is a nation. They say the constitution assumes that the nation of India is a territory and all the people on it, or peoples on it, if you wish. But they say that's wrong. Savarkar, Golwalkar, Upadhyay, they all say a nation is not a territory, it is a people, and the people of India are the Hindu people. Therefore, the constitution should speak of a Hindu Rashtra, and everyone who is not Hindu should only have rights in this constitution on the sufferance of the Hindus. Now, this is such a fundamentally different idea to the idea on which we have built our democracy and our country for the last 70 years, that if it succeeds, it would be tantamount to creating a second Reich, as it were. It would no longer be the Republic of India that we've all known for the last 70 years. That's why the moral urgency of issuing this warning bell. The fact is, to amend the Constitution, because you can't do this without amending the Constitution or rewriting it, to do that you need three things. You need two-thirds majority in the Lok Sabha, which they have. You need half the states. They actually have 20 of the 29 states. And you need two-thirds of the Rajya Sabha, which right now they don't have. But inevitably, because the Rajya Sabha is elected by the state assemblies and they have most of the states, they will have a two-thirds majority in the Rajya Sabha in about 4 years' time. Which is what makes the next Lok Sabha election so frighteningly important. Because if those who have this different vision of the idea of India and the Indian constitution do not reduce the BJP's numbers significantly and deprive it of the possibility of moving an amendment through the Constitution of India will be toast after 2019.
So, can I ask you a rather provocative question, which I don't expect a long reply or no reply also. We can leave it hanging in the air, because I know that the audience is eager to ask questions.
Sure.
But the famous Hindu pluralism, why cannot the Hindu pluralism, you've been speaking of they and this, the Hindu pluralism should be able to surely accommodate the vast infinity of our acceptance, should be able to accept the right-wing ideology as well. Why would you not include it in the purveyance of your magnanimous Hinduism?
But it is there, isn't it? I mean, right now, in the democratic India that we have constructed, in the pluralist India we have, the ideology of Hindutva, the Hindutva ideology is free to propagate, to seek votes, to win seats, and even to form the government.
Because if we
they're there. We're not talking about a Hindu Mukt Bharat or a BJP Mukt Bharat or a Hindutva Mukt Bharat for that matter. We believe it has a place because some people unfortunately believe in these tenets. But you can't have a situation, as the old joke goes, of one man, one vote, one time. And then after the next election, non-Hindus suddenly find themselves relegated to a different status. I was deeply troubled and ashamed when one of our most distinguished Christians, former Director General of Police, former Ambassador, Julio Ribeiro, wrote an article, an open letter in the newspapers last week, saying that he was contemplating the prospect of being reduced to second-class citizenship. That's deeply shame-making. We are not and were never meant to be a Hindu Pakistan. Yes, Pakistan is a country where you have a passport stamp saying non-Muslim if you're not one. Is that what's going to happen to us? I would be ashamed to be that kind of Indian.
So on that note, thank you for giving us such a deep and insightful view of your... And now, I think questions, there are many of them. First here, and then there, and then this side.
Microphone's going around?
Yeah. Microphone has gone to Navtej. We'll move it in this. Navtej, you didn't want it? Javed, sir, yeah. You just lifted your hand. Javed, sir.
Sir, my name is Javed Akhtar.
Hello, Javed.
And for me, all the religions of the world are the same. They are equal in my eyes because I dislike all of them.
Because, sorry?
I dislike all of them.
All of them, I know.
You see, I have heard many speeches from people from different religions, preachers, philosophers, scholars. And every scholar and every preacher tells me...
I'm talking
to him. Okay.
Okay.
I'll give my profile to you.
And a handsome profile it is.
This is a better one. He tells us that their religion tells them to love humanity. Their religions tell them to treat everybody well. Sometimes they tell us that their religion tells them that all the religions are there different ways of going to the same destination. If it is that simple, then why people don't change their religions more often than they do? Point one. Point two, the fact is that if you see alcohol in a bottle, particularly whiskey, and some light is falling on the bottle, it looks beautiful. As a matter of fact, alcohol is used in some medicines also. If you take it in proportion, say 2 pegs every day, you have a very long life. But the
dilates your arteries, just right.
Ultimately, we think that alcohol is bad. Why? Because more often than not, it is misused. That's why we think it is bad. Now, maybe there are some books which most of the religious people have not read. They say some wonderful things. But the fact remains that most of the time, religion is misused like alcohol. One. Point two, if you take the map of the world and mark where is less human right, where women are not empowered, where there is exploitation, repression, lack of freedom of expression, mark those places. Then take another map. Mark in the world where is more religion. Mark Indian map, where is more religion in India. And you will find that the markings are the same. Everybody says, as a matter of fact, when in Times of India and in Indian Express, I see the ads, matrimonial ads. Every educated person tells he is Iyer, he is Nair, he is Rajput, he is Brahman, and then you say this is not religion. If this is not religion, then what is religion?
Social custom.
Religion is that book that has not been read by anybody. Sorry.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, can we take the mic there?
Let me respond because we have, because I think
But
it'll make for a
after
more
this,
interesting.
we'll
We'll go one by one,
Yeah.
but the mic can travel meanwhile.
Yeah.
Thereby, I understand your concern. In fact, much of what you've said I share and agree with and was nodding enthusiastically. But the point is, it has actually served the other side very well to reduce this debate to one between true Hindus and godless secularists. I'm sorry to say that it's become increasingly apparent that the pure secular position, which is the one you've just articulated, which is essentially, probably Nehruji would have enthusiastically applauded you because he himself was an agnostic and didn't believe particularly in religion and said so in a lot of his letters have emerged and been published where he says he has no patience for Maulvis and sadhus and sants and so on, and as far as he's concerned, religion should have no place. But the fact is that despite the thinking of people like Nehruji and yourself, religion has become so deeply entrenched in our society that to fight the battle as one between the godless secularist versus the quote-unquote true believer or the true Hindu is frankly a losing battle. It was necessary, in my view, I talked before you both came of the moral urgency of why I wrote this book. It was rather necessary to reframe the debate as also a contestation within Hinduism. It's not the only possible argument. Your argument is a valid one, and for many it will be the most important one. But I think for many Indians who are proud of their Hinduism or worship and practice it, and who have perhaps been seduced by the argument, by one party saying, we are a Hindu party, we are Hindus like you, we are standing up for your interests, therefore ignore these godless secularists, they spell it S-I-C-K and so on when they abuse me on Twitter. And so to say, sorry, as far as I'm concerned, this is Hinduism, because this is the Hinduism I and large numbers of Indians practice, and yours is actually a distortion. Therefore, at the very least, this is not an argument between true Hindus and secular. There are two sets of Hindus who disagree, and with good reason about it. Now let's neutralize this issue and talk about development. Let's talk about your economic mismanagement. Let's ask you where is Achhe Din, etc. So we can move the debate in a different direction. The pure secular argument, as you know, for example, didn't work in Gujarat for 3 successive elections. And there is a real risk it might not work in many other places. We need to take the debate to practical issues of development, of welfare, of human advancement. But in order to be able to be heard on those issues, we have to neutralize the communal appeal. That's essentially my analysis. It's one point of view. There are many in my own party who may not agree with me on that. But I'm speaking in any case here for myself. This is not a Congress party pamphlet. It's my reflections and my beliefs.
Masani, half Parsi, half Hindu Kayas. I am worried about the fact that we're neglecting the elephant in the room, which is the question of caste, Varna, pollution. No other religion in the world operates the kind of system of pollution that Hinduism does, where even your shadow cannot fall on a caste Hindu.
That's 150 years ago.
No. It's happening very much now too, where a lot of Hindu homes will not even give water to a Muslim because anything that touches the utensils is polluting. I mean, you come from a very privileged Nair caste, which thoroughly brutalized and exploited the lower caste of Kerala. So it's easy for people like us who grew up without that kind of oppression in our own homes to forget it. And I think unless you understand the oppression and exclusiveness and racism of caste, which goes back thousands of years, because there's genetic research showing that it's linked to racial Aryan invasion. The whole Brahmin caste is rooted in that, and the endogamy that was practiced for thousands of years. You cannot, without addressing that, begin to understand Hindutva, because the kind of aggression, the kind of intolerance that is part of Hindutva is part of widespread Hinduism via the caste system. And every religion is a combination of theology and practice. You cannot distinguish theology from practice.
I don't know if you were here, Zarir, when we had this conversation about caste, were you? Because we actually discussed some of the points you made. Okay, so I don't think I have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, yours is a valid critique and a critique that many have made. I would disagree only with your last sentence, that you can't distinguish between theology and practice, because you can, in my view. And that, indeed, in many ways, some of the most vigorous reform efforts to undo the iniquities of caste discrimination have come from within the faith, by people at all levels. I mean, I can cite to you not just Brahmins who have seen the light, but reformers from the outcast communities, Mahatma Yankali in Travancore, or from the lower caste communities, Sri Narayana Guru and others, who have themselves reformed the faith. I mean, Sri Narayana Guru is a very interesting example. His community were denied entry to temples. He went into a river and found a lingam there, a stone in the shape of a lingam, and consecrated his own temple. In other words, he was basically saying, I am as entitled to worship the same God as other Hindus are worshipping, as you, the Brahmins, are keeping me out of your temples. And such actions actually helped lower the barriers, and there's no question that some of the pollution that you observed, that you mentioned was being observed, was observed at one time. I'm not aware of this kind of, the acting on the basis of shadows being cast and so on is still happening.
It is happening.
In some places?
It is.
Well, then I come from a more enlightened part of India, I suppose.
But, there is... One of our young volunteers, I've been told we have no time for another question, but we've had two gentlemen. We've got a young lady volunteer who is here. Please ask your quick question and a very quick response from Shashi.
I'm really sorry, but with all due respect, with a lot of respect, I think this has already been touched upon by a lot of other people, but the thing that has been plaguing me throughout the session, and that you touched upon earlier, but only slightly. So the question that I have was never really answered. So the whole argument that you presented was kind of a defense of Hinduism, and how the discrimination that you see is like more of a social manifestation and not within the religion itself. But as people have pointed out already, the Varna system does exist in Hindu texts. So I just want like a clear statement from you saying, do you disagree that the Varna system exists in Hinduism or not?
No, I don't agree that the Varnashrama Dharma, as it's called, is there in the text. The question is, what is the conclusion you draw from it? If it's descriptive of people's professions and what they're supposed to do in life, it doesn't bother anybody. It's only when you need to interpret it as discrimination, when you grant privileges on the basis of it, that it becomes objectionable. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't practice that kind of discrimination. I disapprove of those who do. But to my mind, that is a social practice that I'm free to challenge, as many others have challenged. Social injustice is up for grabs. You must fight it. You must fight for justice and change. But that doesn't mean that you throw out the entire religion with the dross that's accumulated on it. When you have a religion that's been around 4,000 years, there's an awful lot of good stuff and an awful lot of bad stuff that clings to it. Get rid of the bad stuff and move on, if you care about the faith. If all you see is the bad stuff, by all means abandon the faith. But for me, the good stuff appeals to me a lot, as I've said in this book, and I hope you'll read the book and find out why.